Let me tell you a story that I wish I didn't have to. It's about my wife, May, and how things started falling apart between us. I don't know where it all began, but I can tell you that, in the beginning, we were solid. I mean, like any marriage, there were ups and downs, but nothing that screamed, "Watch out." She had always been into helping people, always volunteering at shelters or organizing some local drive for the homeless. At first, I respected it. She had this huge heart, always trying to make the world a better place. It didn't feel strange to me, or at least not at first. She would spend a few evenings a month at the shelter, no big deal, right? It was consistent. She'd always come home on time, we'd eat dinner together, maybe have a glass of wine, and everything felt normal. I never even thought twice about it. She was doing good work, and it gave her something she was passionate about outside of our life together. But then things started to shift. It wasn't overnight. It was gradual, sneaky even, in the way it crept in. At first, it was more frequent trips to the shelter. She started staying out late, saying they had emergencies or there was some crisis with one of the regulars who needed help. Then it wasn't just evenings anymore. It turned into weekends, and eventually, she'd text me to say she wasn't coming home at all, that she needed to stay overnight to handle some situation. And me? I trusted her. I really did. Or maybe I wanted to believe that what she said made sense, that she was genuinely tied up with work that mattered. But something started eating away at me. Call it a gut feeling, intuition, whatever you want to name it. It's that little voice in your head that tells you things aren't as they seem. I try to shake it off because our marriage had always been built on trust, or at least I thought it was. It's funny how, when you look back, you start questioning everything. Every missed dinner, every delayed text, every "I'm too tired tonight, can we talk later?" It got to the point where she became distant, and it wasn't just emotionally. Physically, we weren't connecting like we used to. The spontaneous intimacy we had, gone. She dodged my advances with excuses that felt just a little too convenient. "I'm exhausted from the shelter," or "I'm stressed and I can't right now." I don't want to be that guy, you know? The one who thinks his wife is up to no good just because things get tough for a while. I figured, maybe it was me. Maybe I hadn't been paying her enough attention, or maybe I'd been too wrapped up in my own work. I told myself, "You're being paranoid, Dan. Chill." But one night, something happened that I couldn't ignore. We hadn't been intimate for a while, and then, out of nowhere, she seemed interested. It was sudden and a little weird, but I wasn't about to question it. In the moment, I was just happy to have a spark of what we used to have. But then I saw it, a rash, right there in her bikini area. My brain froze for a second. What the hell was that? I didn't say anything at first, but it bugged me. When the moment passed, I casually mentioned that she should get it checked out. Just in case. She looked embarrassed, like I just caught her in some kind of lie. Yeah, I'll go see a doctor," she said, brushing it off. But the look on her face? It didn't sit right with me. I could tell something was off. She wasn't just embarrassed. She looked scared, like she was hiding something. The next day, she went to the gynecologist, and when she got back, I asked how it went. Her response? Nothing. She barely said a word, just mumbled that it was nothing serious and that the doctor had given her some cream. But she wouldn't look me in the eye, wouldn't even sit down and have a conversation about it. Instead, she changed the subject like it was no big deal. That's when the alarms in my head really started ringing. And now, here I am, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. When did things start falling apart? Was it my fault? Did I miss the signs? I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to find that moment when things started to shift. I remembered when we used to be happy, really happy. We'd go on road trips, hit up little diners on the side of the highway, laughing at nothing, just enjoying each other's company. We were that couple, the ones who people would say, "They're perfect together." But all of that felt so far away now, like a memory that didn't belong to me anymore. I wondered if I'd taken it for granted, if maybe I hadn't been giving her enough attention. Maybe that's why she was pulling away. Maybe I'd screwed up, and this was my punishment. I could feel myself slipping into this dark place, where I didn't know what to believe anymore. Every time she was late, I wondered where she really was. Every time she picked up her phone and left the room to talk, I wanted to ask who the hell she was texting. But I didn't. I kept it all bottled up because I didn't want to be that paranoid husband who turns into a jealous mess. But the truth was, I was already there. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how bad it was yet. After that whole doctor thing with May, something inside me snapped. You know that feeling when you've just had enough of the lies and half-truths, but you still don't have solid proof? That's where I was. The fact that she brushed off the whole gynecologist visit and avoided the conversation altogether didn't sit right with me. I could feel something gnawing at me, and I couldn't just let it go. I needed answers. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew which clinic she'd gone to for the appointment, so one morning I drove there, parked my car across the street, and waited. It sounds crazy, right? Sitting there like some kind of stalker. But at this point, I didn't care. I needed to know what was going on, even if it meant doing something I'd never imagined myself doing. I waited in the clinic's hallway like a damn fool, watching people come and go. I don't even know what I was expecting to happen, but when May's gynecologist finally came out, I knew I had to act fast. I approached her, feeling like my stomach was about to turn inside out. I kept my cool, though, or at least I tried. I asked her about May, about the rash. I even tried to make it sound like I was just concerned about her health. You know? But the doctor shut me down hard. She said something about doctor-patient confidentiality, that she couldn't discuss anything with me without May's permission. Her voice was polite, but I could tell she was annoyed. And that only made me more suspicious. What was May hiding from me? Why would she avoid talking about something so basic if it wasn't a big deal? My mind went to the darkest places. Maybe she'd caught something venereal. Maybe she wasn't just volunteering at the shelter. Maybe she was hooking up with someone. The idea hit me like a freight train. I couldn't shake it anymore. I was convinced this wasn't just about her being distant or stressed from work. There was something going on. I could feel it in my bones. Every late night, every excuse to stay at the shelter, every awkward silence between us. It all started to add up. I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter what. So, I decided to follow her. I wasn't proud of it, but what choice did I have? I started small, just checking her routine. When she said she was heading to the shelter, I'd drive over there a little while later, park down the street, and watch. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I didn't like it either. But I had to know. I had to see it with my own eyes. The first few times, everything seemed normal. She was there, helping people, talking to the other volunteers, and organizing supplies. She looked like the same May I'd known for years. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was too perfect, too staged. And the more I watched, the more I started picking up on little things. One night, after waiting for what felt like hours, I finally caught a break. May was inside the shelter, talking to one of the staff members, a younger guy I hadn't seen before. They weren't doing anything suspicious, not really. But the way they stood close together, the way they seemed to be whispering, it set me off. I knew something was going on, and I wasn't going to ignore it any longer. The next day, I went into the shelter. I tried to act casual, like I was just popping in to say hi, but inside, I was boiling. I asked a couple of the staff members about May, about how often she was there, what she did, where she went after hours. Most of them gave me the same story. May was an amazing volunteer, dedicated, selfless, always going above and beyond for the homeless. But there was one woman, an older lady who'd been there a while, who seemed a bit uneasy when I asked too many questions. She hesitated before answering, and I could see it in her face. There was something she wasn't telling me. I pushed a little harder, but she clammed up, saying that May was a good person, and that was all I needed to know. That was it. That was all the confirmation I needed. The way she avoided my eyes, the way she shuffled around like she was nervous. It told me everything without her saying a word. I left the shelter that day more sure than ever that May was hiding something. And it wasn't just some random fling. It felt bigger than that, deeper. I could feel it in my gut like a sickness that wouldn't go away. The doubts were eating me alive. I couldn't even look at her without wondering where she'd been, who she'd been with, what kind of lies she was spinning to cover her tracks. I considered hiring a private investigator. Hell, I even looked up a few online. But then I thought, no, I need to figure this out on my own first. If I brought someone else into this, if I found out for sure that she was cheating, then what? What would I do? I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, I kept digging. Every time she left the house, I made sure I knew where she was going. I checked her phone when she wasn't looking. I I started noticing patterns, times when she'd disappear for hours without explanation, or when she'd be too busy to answer my calls. I thought about confronting her, straight up asking her what the hell was going on, but I didn't want to tip her off. Not until I had proof. And that's where things started spiraling out of control. The more I watched, the more I questioned everything. Every smile, every kiss, every "I love you" started to feel fake. Like she was just playing a role, pretending to be the same woman I married, while living a double life behind my back. I wasn't sleeping much at this point. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction we'd had in the last few months, searching for clues, for any hint of the woman I thought I knew. But she wasn't there anymore. She'd been replaced by this stranger, someone I couldn't trust, someone I barely even recognized. I was drowning in suspicion, and there was no turning back. Whatever was going on with May, I knew it was worse than I'd ever imagined. And I was about to find out just how bad things really were. By this point, I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I was desperate. I couldn't sit around and let this eat away at me. I needed real answers. Watching May, following her, going through her phone, it wasn't enough. I needed to know what she was hiding and who she was hiding it with. If I didn't find out soon, I was going to lose it. So I decided to take things a step further. I started spending more time around the shelter, watching the people who came and went. I wanted to see if there was anyone who could give me the kind of answers I was looking for. I'd sit in my car for hours, blending into the background, just observing. There was a steady stream of people. Most of them looked like they had nowhere else to go, worn down by life. The shelter was their last stop before falling off the map completely. One guy stood out, though. Troy. He was at the shelter nearly every day, hanging around the back, smoking a cigarette, talking to whoever would listen. He looked rough, long, greasy hair, a beard that hadn't seen a razor in months, clothes that were barely holding together. But there was something about him, something in the way he moved, like he knew things. Things I needed to know. I don't know what came over me, but one afternoon, after I'd been sitting there for hours, I got out of the car and approached him. I didn't have a plan, just raw frustration driving me forward. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a couple of bills, and waved them in front of him. "You got a minute?" I asked. Troy eyed the money like it was gold, and I knew I had him. He nodded, grunted something that sounded like "sure," and followed me to the car. I told him to get in, and he didn't hesitate. Desperation must have made me reckless, because I didn't care about the risk. I just needed to hear what he knew. I didn't tell him who I was, didn't mention May was my wife. I figured the less he knew, the better. Instead, I started asking questions, keeping it vague, like I was just some guy curious about the shelter. "So, what do you think of May?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Troy shrugged. "She's all right. Helps out a lot. People around here like her." I could feel my heart racing, but I stayed calm, pushing a little further. "Yeah, she seems great. Does she, spend a lot of time here with you guys?" Troy looked at me, a sly grin spreading across his face. "You mean, do you want to fuck her too?" His words hit me like a punch in the gut. I didn't expect that. I froze, my mind scrambling to catch up. What the hell did he mean by that? I couldn't just let it slide. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tense. Troy laughed, this low, gritty sound that made my skin crawl. "Come on, man. Everybody knows. May's easy to arrange something with. Couple guys I know have already had a go at her." It felt like the world stopped spinning. I didn't even know how to react. My wife? My wife was being passed around at a homeless shelter? The woman I thought I knew, the one I'd shared my life with for years? I felt sick, but I kept my face straight, not giving away the explosion of anger that was building inside me. "You're serious?" I managed to ask, my voice barely steady. Troy shrugged again, like it was no big deal. "Yeah, man. She's a nice lady and all, but if you want something extra, you can work it out." I couldn't listen anymore. I wanted to punch him, throw him out of the car, and just scream, but what good would that do? I had my answer, or at least part of it. The confirmation I'd been dreading was right in front of me. May wasn't just cheating. She was whoring herself out to these guys at the shelter. How the hell had it come to this? I shoved some money into Troy's hand and told him to get out. He didn't argue, just took the cash and slipped out of the car like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just shattered my entire world with a few careless words. I sat there for a while after he left, staring at the steering wheel, my mind racing. Every excuse May had ever given me, too busy, too tired, it all made sense now. She wasn't tired from volunteering. She was tired because she was sleeping with homeless guys. The woman I'd married, the one I'd loved, the one I'd built my life with, was out there degrading herself, doing things I couldn't even wrap my head around. I drove home in a daze, barely able to focus. When I walked through the door, the house felt foreign, like I didn't belong there anymore. Every picture of us, every piece of furniture we'd picked out together, it all felt like a lie. And May, God, I didn't even want to look at her. But when she got home later that night, I tried to act normal, keeping everything bottled up inside. I couldn't let her know that I knew, not yet. But I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Every time I looked at her, I saw Troy's smirk, heard his disgusting laugh, his crude words echoing in my head. Do you want to fuck her too? How would I let things get this bad? How would I miss the signs? That night, I lay in bed next to her, pretending to sleep while she drifted off like nothing was wrong. I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over again in my head. The anger was building, eating away at me, but the worst part? The jealousy. The idea that other men had been with her, used her, and I hadn't seen it. I thought about confronting her right then and there. I imagined shaking her awake and demanding the truth, screaming at her until she admitted what she'd done. But I didn't. I didn't know if I could handle hearing it come from her mouth. Instead, I just lay there, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. She'd ruined us. And for what? For some sick thrill? For attention from guys who didn't give a damn about her? I couldn't understand it, and I wasn't sure I ever would. But one thing was for sure. I couldn't keep pretending. Something had to give, and soon. I didn't know how I was going to handle it. But I knew this much. Whatever happened next, it was going to change everything. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I had to confront her. The moment I walked through the door that evening, I knew I wasn't going to pretend any longer. I had spent days stewing, replaying everything Troy had told me over and over in my head. The disgust, the betrayal, the humiliation, it was eating me alive. Every minute I spent in the same house with her, the anger grew, boiling under the surface. It was only a matter of time before I exploded. May was in the kitchen when I got home, acting like it was just another normal evening. She smiled at me, but all I could see was the lie. The mask she'd been wearing for God knows how long. I stared at her, my fists clenched, the words already forming in my mouth. I wasn't going to let her charm her way out of this. I needed the truth, and I needed it now. We need to talk, I said, my voice barely holding back the anger. She looked at me, a bit confused at first, but I could tell she knew something was off. What's wrong? She asked, her voice all sweet and innocent like she didn't have a clue. But I wasn't buying it. I walked into the living room, trying to keep myself from shouting right there. I know what you've been doing, I said, staring straight at her. I know about the men at the shelter. I talked to someone, and they told me everything. Her face went pale, and for a second, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. But then, like she'd practiced it a million times, she put on this look of disbelief, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe what I was saying. What are you talking about, Dan? That's insane. I don't know who you've been talking to, but they're lying to you. That's when I lost it. Don't play dumb with me, May. I talked to Troy. He told me everything. The guys at the shelter? You've been sleeping with them, haven't you? She flinched, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter. Troy, she repeated, her voice trembling. You're seriously going to believe some homeless guy over me? He's lying, Dan. He's manipulating you. I could feel my blood boiling. Don't even try it. Don't you dare twist this around. I've seen the way you've been acting. I've seen the way you avoid me, the way you dodge my questions, the excuses. Don't tell me I'm imagining things. I'm not a fucking idiot, May. Her defenses crumbled in front of me, piece by piece. She looked down at the floor, her voice barely a whisper now. It's not what you think. Then what the hell is it? I shouted, the fury breaking through. Tell me. I want to hear it from you. Don't lie. Just fucking say it. For a moment, she just stood there, silent, like she was debating whether to keep up the lie or come clean. Then, finally, she broke. The tears started falling, and she crumbled into a sobbing mess right in front of me. I did it, she whispered. I had sex with him. I couldn't stop. I don't know why. I have some kind of problem. It's like a compulsion. I don't even understand it myself. I swear to God, Dan, I never wanted to hurt you. A compulsion? A problem? Was she serious? I stood there, staring at her, my heart pounding in my chest, my fists clenched so tight I thought my knuckles might burst through my skin. A compulsion? I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. You're telling me you slept with a bunch of random guys because you couldn't help yourself? What kind of bullshit excuse is that, May? She was sobbing harder now, struggling to get the words out. It's like I can't control it. It's an illness. I know it sounds crazy, but I need help, Dan. I can't stop. Please. I'm begging you. I didn't want this to happen. I couldn't listen to her anymore. I couldn't even look at her. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone weak, selfish, and pathetic. The excuses, the tears, the justifications. It all felt like a sick joke. How could she stand there and try to make this about her needing help? Like she was the victim here? I can't fucking believe this, I said, my voice low but full of rage. You destroyed us. For what? For some sick thrill? And now you want me to feel sorry for you because you can't control yourself. She reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. I didn't want her touching me, not after what she'd done. Done? Plus it. I'm sorry. I know I've messed everything up, but I need you. I can't fix this on my own. But I was done. Done with the lies. Done with the guilt. Done with her. I'm leaving, I said, turning away from her. I can't stay here and listen to this anymore. Where are you going? She cried, her voice full of panic. Please don't leave me, Dan. I'll get help, I swear. Just don't go. I didn't respond. I walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me, leaving her there with her tears and her pathetic excuses. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to get the hell away from her before I did something I'd regret. I drove straight to my best friend Charlie's place. I didn't call ahead, didn't give him a heads up, I just showed up. When he opened the door and saw the look on my face, he didn't ask any questions. He just grabbed 2 beers from the fridge and sat me down on his couch. We didn't say anything for a while. I just sat there, staring at the floor, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. Finally, Charlie broke the silence. You want to talk about it? He asked, his voice quiet but understanding. I nodded, and the words just started spilling out. I told him everything, the suspicions, the phone checking, the confrontation with Troy, and then the confession. He listened without interrupting, just letting me get it all out. When I was done, he leaned back and sighed. Man, that's rough, he said. But look, I'm going to be real with you. You can't save her. I looked at him, not sure what he meant. What do you mean? People like that, he continued, the ones who get caught up in this kind of shit, they don't change. You can send her to therapy, you can try to fix things, but at the end of the day, she's not going to stop. It's who she is now. I wanted to argue with him, to tell him he was wrong, that May wasn't like that she could get help. But deep down, I knew he was right. The woman I thought I married? She was gone. And the person she had become? I couldn't save her from herself. You think I should just end it? I asked, my voice cracking. Charlie nodded. Yeah, man, I've been where you are, and I'm telling you, this is only going to get worse if you let it. You need to walk away. Divorce her. Start over. The word divorce felt like a punch to the gut, but at the same time, it felt like the only option left. After that night at Charlie's, things became crystal clear to me. The life I thought I had, it was over. The love, the trust, the partnership gone. May hadn't just cheated on me. She had shattered everything. And as much as it hurt to admit it, Charlie was right. I couldn't save her. I couldn't save us. What I had to do now was save myself. I spent a couple of days just thinking things over, avoiding May as much as possible. I'd leave the house early, stay out late, and when I did come home, I barely spoke to her. She knew something was coming. I could see it in the way she looked at me, her eyes filled with guilt, like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I couldn't live with her lies anymore. It wasn't just the cheating. Hell, maybe I could have worked through that if it was a one-time thing. But what she had done, the way she tried to manipulate me with her bullshit excuses about some psychological disorder or fetish, that was something else, something darker. It wasn't just an affair. It was a sickness, and I couldn't be dragged down into her mess anymore. One evening, after days of silence, I finally decided to have the talk. I sat on the couch, staring at the TV, waiting for her to come home. When she walked in, she immediately knew something was up. She froze for a second, and I could tell she was bracing herself. "Dan, what's going on?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I didn't have the energy for that anymore. "We need to talk." She sat down across from me, biting her lip nervously. "What's wrong? Is this about the other night?" "Look, I know I screwed up, but I'm trying, Dan. I really am. That was it. That was all I could take. I want a divorce," I said, my voice cold, firm, like I wasn't even speaking to her anymore, just stating a fact. She blinked, as if she didn't hear me right. "What?" "You heard me. I can't do this anymore. We're done." She stared at me, her eyes wide, the panic setting in. "Dan, no. Please don't do this. We can fix it. I know I messed up, but I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to fight it." "Fight what, May? Your compulsions? Your illness? Do you even hear yourself? You don't even know what the fuck is wrong with you. And you expect me to stick around and wait for you to figure it out?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head, reaching out for me, but I pulled away. I didn't want her touch. I didn't want anything from her anymore. "Done? Bussy, I love you. I don't want to lose you. I made mistakes, but I'm still your wife. We can work through this. We can go to therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on me." I stood up, pacing the room, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's not about therapy. It's not about trying harder. It's about trust, May. And I don't trust you. I don't know who you are anymore. You lied to me for months, probably longer. You betrayed me in ways I can't even put into words. How the hell am I supposed to come back from that?" She was sobbing now, her hands shaking as she clutched at her shirt. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't want any of this to happen. I just lost control." "Yeah, well, it's too late for that," I said, my voice hard. "You lost control, and now you've lost me. I can't do this anymore. We're done." She collapsed onto the couch, her body racked with sobs, but I didn't feel anything for her. No pity, no sympathy. All I felt was relief. Relief that I was finally saying the words I'd been holding inside for so long. Relief that this nightmare was coming to an end. She must have realized that there was no change in my mind, because eventually she stopped begging. She wiped her eyes, sat up straight, and nodded. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "If that's what you want." "It is," I said, my tone firm. "We'll talk about the details, splitting up the house, the money, all of it. But I'm done, May. This is the end." And just like that, it was over. She didn't argue. She didn't fight. She knew there was no coming back from this. We spent the next few days figuring out the logistics, how we divide the assets, the accounts, everything. It was cold, clinical. We talked like strangers dividing up a life that no longer mattered. I knew I couldn't get through this alone. The weight of her betrayal was suffocating, and I needed help processing what the hell had just happened to my life. So I started seeing a psychologist. I didn't even know what to expect going into it, but I needed someone to help me make sense of the chaos in my head. In those first few sessions, I spilled everything. The suspicions, the lies, the confessions, the anger, the heartbreak. It all came out in a flood of words I hadn't been able to say to anyone else. I told the therapist how lost I felt, how I didn't know if I'd ever trust anyone again, how I couldn't understand why May did what she did. And you know what? Talking about it helped. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The therapist helped me see that it wasn't my fault, that I wasn't to blame for May's actions. She had her own demons, her own issues that had nothing to do with me. As hard as it was to accept, the truth was that no amount of love or effort on my part could have saved our marriage. It was broken long before I even realized it. But still, that didn't stop the memories from creeping back in. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd think about the early days back when May and I were happy. Back when we were a team. I'd remember the road trips, the late-night conversations, the way she used to look at me with nothing but love in her eyes. And then I'd remember how it all fell apart, how those memories didn't mean a damn thing anymore. I tried to reconcile the two versions of her, the woman I thought I knew, and the woman who betrayed me in ways I couldn't even imagine. But the truth was, they were one and the same. I just hadn't seen it before. As the weeks went by, I started to notice how my old life, the life I'd shared with May, began to feel distant, like it belonged to someone else. I'd look at old photos of us and feel nothing. No pain, no anger, no nostalgia. Just emptiness. Those memories didn't matter anymore because the person I had built them with wasn't real. Not the way I thought she was. The divorce process was surprisingly smooth, all things considered. They didn't fight me on much. We divided everything equally. And just like that, the papers were signed. It was official. We were no longer husband and wife. I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. But at the same time, there was this hollow feeling in my gut. Like I'd lost something I couldn't get back, even though I knew it was gone long before we ever made it official. After the divorce, I tried to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy, but I threw myself into therapy, determined to get through the wreckage May had left behind. Therapy helped me make sense of everything. I talked about the anger, the betrayal, and how I couldn't understand why she did what she did. My therapist helped me see it wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have fixed her. She had her own demons, and nothing I could have done would have saved our marriage. As time passed, I started feeling like myself again. My old life with May began to fade, like it belonged to someone else. I picked up old hobbies, spent time with friends, and slowly, I began to feel normal. But one day, out of nowhere, I ran into Sarah, one of May's friends. That's when I learned that May wasn't doing well. She contracted HIV, refused treatment, and was spiraling into depression and alcohol abuse. I didn't know how to feel about it. After everything she'd done, part of me still felt sorry for her. Against my better judgment, I decided to meet with her. When I saw her, I barely recognized the woman I had once loved. She looked older, exhausted, and completely worn out by her illness and drinking. We talked, but she had given up on life. She didn't want help, didn't believe anything could be done. I left feeling hollow, realizing I couldn't save her, just like I couldn't save our marriage. That was the last time I saw her. I cut contact after that. It wasn't my responsibility to fix her anymore. I kept working on myself, and eventually, I met someone new, someone who made me believe in love again. It wasn't easy, but I started over, and for the first time in years, I found peace. Looking back, I realized that May's betrayal wasn't the end. It was part of a journey that taught me more about myself than I ever could have imagined. Her problems weren't mine to fix, and her actions, while painful, gave me the chance to start fresh. I've moved on now, and while the scars remain, they no longer define me. Every crisis is an opportunity for a new beginning, and that's exactly what I've found.